Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of United Talks podcast. This is the part two of the Bruno's explosive interview, and we're going to break everything down here. The last video we talked about how Bruno was on the brink of joining his football hero, Cristiano Ronaldo. Now, when Bruno arrived at Old Trafford, he did not walk into that stable, basically serial winning environment, serial winning machine. He walked into that deep tactical and cultural turmoil. Now, in the previous video, we talked about like how he got to where he was from the background and everything. So if you haven't already, please go watch it. This is me dissecting every word that Bruno said in that interview and trying to give my own take and all of that. But I need us to kind of, dig deep. And this is kind of like one of our deep dives that we always do. And this is part two. Now, he walked into a tactical turmoil at Manchester United, but obviously, Manchester United had spent years cycling through different managers, each bringing a completely conflicting football philosophy and a vastly different recruitment model. And he talked about the fact that when United were recruiting, we're getting managers that were not suited for the players and getting players that were not suited for the manager, right? Bruno also identified that this systemic failure was already existent, and he immediately started to kind of, find things out. And under previous regimes, the club had made fatal mistakes, according to Bruno Fernandes, signing players based on their fame, their commercial appeal, or even the social media presence rather than their tactical fit or character profile. When a club changes managers every 2 years, the players signed for the previous coach system suddenly become obsolete. Perfect example. Luke Shaw was signed by Louis van Gaal. Dalot was signed by Mourinho. Maguire was signed by Ole Gunnar Solskjaer. Martinez was signed by Erik ten Hag. That's 4 managers. In that back line, 4 players, 4 different managers. Let's come to the midfield. Kobe Mainoo brought on, not signed, but brought on from the academy by Erik ten Hag. So that's still 4 managers, 5 players, 4 managers. Casemiro signed on by Erik ten Hag, 5 players or 6 players, 4 managers. Then you have a Bruno Fernandes from Ole Gunnar Solskjaer. Then you have Ahmad that came under Solskjaer but never played under Solskjaer. His first round of games at 22 was under Amorim. Then on the other left side, you have Dogu signed under Amorim. You also have Cunha signed under Amorim. That's already like 8 players with 5 managers, right? Then you also have Ibrahim Šeško signed under Amorim, Mbumo signed under Amorim. So it's a mix, right? You have Ugarte, Xerxes, Mazraoui, De Ligt signed under, signed under Erik ten Hag, right? So there's a systemic mismatch and a systemic failure. He gave an example of Pep Guardiola. When he signs players, they are signed for him. This is not the first person that is making such statements. Even Marcus Rashford made a statement when he gave that interview with Micah Richards and one of these, I think is, what's his name? I've forgotten his name. Is an English legend, right? English football legend, right? Now, he basically had given that interview and stated the same thing, and people gave him pelters for saying stuff like that. Now Bruno is repeating the exact thing, right, that Rashford said. Now, when the club changes managers every 2 years, the players signed for the previous coaching system suddenly become obsolete, and you're left with a bloated, fragmented squad full of players who do not suit the new manager, forcing you to spend another 100 million to buy 5 more players. Bruno also argues that character in a football club is actually far more important than raw quality. And at elite level, every player who signs for Manchester United has quality, right? That is a given, but quality fluctuates. Players go through periods where their confidence is short, where the players play poorly, or where they suffer from fatigue, and that is when character becomes your only currency. And the right character will push himself to get out of a slump, and more importantly, when they are playing poorly, they actually will use their leadership to lift players around them. And this brings us to one of the most important, fascinating tactical revelations of the interview: the delicate balance of risk and reward playmaker. And that was the question that was asked of Bruno Fernandes in that interview by Steven. right? The delicate balance of risk versus reward, right? Basically, as Bruno is a playmaker for risk versus reward, Bruno Fernandes is a player who takes more risks on the football pitch than almost any other creative midfielder in the world. And he gave himself as an example, and compared to also Kobbie Mainoo as well. Now, his high-profile volume risk takeover, he's a high-profile volume, high-volume risk taker, and as a result, he loses possession far more often than deeper, more conservative midfielders like Kobbie Mainoo and Casemiro. This style of play has often made him a lightning rod for criticism and from traditional pundits who actually value sterile control over high reward progression. He even talked about an example where he said he asked Ten Hag and Ten Hag told him to shoot less. When you see that or hear that, you're like, oh, Ten Hag told me to shoot less, but he now analyzed what Ten Hag had observed, that there are certain points around the box and within the box that if Bruno shoots, he misses. So he has to tell him the areas to cover. Just as when we're analyzing Cunha, there are certain areas around the box. I know the Sun did that analysis. Certain areas around the box where Cunha can score from, right? But Bruno also defends this philosophy with absolute tactical clarity. He explains that risk is a collective equation, and if you look at elite teams, they always deploy a designated risk taker who has the freedom to fail because the surrounding structure is designed to absorb those failures. He points to Manchester City under Pep Guardiola with De Bruyne, the player who takes the progressive high risk risks, and players like Rodri or Jack Grealish that are there to provide control and safety, especially for Rodri, and most likely even like Bernardo Silva. Now, Bruno also applies his exact same logic to Manchester United's midfield. When he plays alongside Casemiro and Kobbie Mainoo, as I mentioned, he understands their respective roles. Casemiro and Kobbie Mainoo control players. They are control players. They are players that like to control possession. Their risk profile should be incredibly low, but operating as the progressive number 10, you must take 4 risks for every one risk that their deeper players take. That's why when you notice Kobbie Mainoo takes that one weird pass, Bruno has already taken 4 weird passes, right? 4 weird passes, 4 risky passes, and if he misses 2 or 3 ambitious passes through the tight defensive line, it is not any big issue, because if he gets the 4th one right, it always results in a clear-cut goal-scoring opportunity. Hence why he's always having the highest chance creation. And if you do not have players that are willing to fail, your attack becomes predictable, slow, and stagnant. And that is why Bruno always takes that risk. Now, the high-risk, high-reward approach was refined under Erik Ten Hag, as I mentioned earlier. Using detailed data analytics, Ten Hag sat Bruno down in his office and showed him a statistical board mapping out his shooting output, and the data revealed a stark reality. Bruno was taking shots far too many low. Bruno was actually taking far too many low-value shots, speculative shots from central areas, well outside the 18-yard box, and the conversion rate was incredibly low, resulting in wasted possession and cheap turnovers. Now, Ten Hag gave him clear tactical directive: restrict the central long-range shots. Instead, focus on drifting into the left and the right half spaces closer to the penalty box. Then the data proved that when Bruno operated in those tight lateral channels near the edge of the 18-yard box, his passing and the shooting angles were far more lethal, and his success rate skyrocketed. But Bruno also adjusted his game, trading speculative 30-yard thunderbolts and thunder shots for high-value, high-precision entries into the penalty box. And that's why his chance creation actually improved. And the results of this tactical refinement is that they were written in the history books. On the final day of the 25-26 season, right? Bruno against Brighton, in the 33rd minute of the match, Bruno actually floated in an exceptional corner into the box, and Patrick Dogu rose the highest. to head it home, sealing Manchester United's victory and securing a third place finish. That's super interesting when you compare what he's learned from Ten Hag compared to now. But the goal was far more than just 3 points. The assist was Bruno's 21st of the Premier League campaign. And I said that this interview was done before the final Premier League game. With the single precise delivery, Bruno officially broke his all-time Premier League record of most assists in a single season, surpassing the legendary benchmark of 20 assists held jointly by Thierry Henry and Kevin De Bruyne. Now let that sink in. In a season where Manchester United faced intense transition, their captain produced the single greatest creative campaign in the history of English football. Bruno ended the season with 9 goals and 21 assists, right? In 38 Premier League games. If you add the extra game, I think that was the Brighton game in the FA Cup, that is 22 assists in all competitions with 9 goals. That is like 31 goal contributions in a season, right? Now, he also created a staggering 132 chances. That's Bruno Fernandes for you. The highest in the league by a country mile, and 43 more than his nearest competitor, Liverpool's Dominic Szoboszlai. He also equaled Steven Gerrard's long-standing record of 11 set-piece assists in a single season. Now, his peerless performance earned him an average flash score player rating of an incredible 8.0. And I think even FotMob also gave similar rating. Comfortably clear of Arsenal's Declan Rice, who was second with 7.6. Right. That's according to Flash Score. According to FotMob, he was rated higher and clear above Erling Haaland. How does a 31-year-old midfielder maintain such a high level of physical output without ever, succumbing to fatigue and injury? First, now I'll tell you why Bruno never gets tired. Bruno revealed his elite training methodology. He believes that physical fitness is a cognitive discipline. Now, in training sessions at Carrington, when the squad finishes their collective tactical drills and most players head inside for recovery, Bruno stays out. He deliberately practices high-skilled technical drills. When he's trying so many things and he's already tired, he tries high-skilled technical drills, shooting, final third passing, and the crossing, right? And his crossing drills, right? When he is completely exhausted. The reason for that, or the reasoning, is basically simple for Bruno. In the final 20-30 minutes of a high-intensity Premier League match, your brain does not function the same way it does in the first 10 minutes. Psychological fatigue slows down your cognitive processing. Simple science here, leading to actually poor decision making and technical execution. By forcing his body and his brain to execute highly complex tactical and technical actions under extreme physical fatigue during training, Bruno conditions his mind to remain calm, precise, and clinical during dying embers of matches. That is why in the 89th minute of a game, when everyone else is gasping for air, Bruno Fernandes is still capable of delivering a match-winning 50-yard diagonal switch, or even an assist or a pass, or even a goal. This elite standard of excellence is why Erik ten Hag chose to hand him the captain's armband, and he explained why, kind of when ten Hag was transitioning from Harry Maguire, who was handed the captain's armband by Ole Gunnar Solskjaer. Now, it was a highly massive, controversial story at the time, with the media desperate to paint a picture of a fractured, toxic dressing room. But Bruno's handle of the situation is a masterclass in leadership. Because when Ten Hag called him into the office and offered him the captaincy, Bruno immediately reacted. His immediate reaction was not to say, "Oh yes, give me the captain's armband." It was not like, "Oh, let me celebrate it." No, he understood the immense weight of the armband, but he also understood how painful and the public, how painful and how the public would react to this decision, especially even from the perspective of Harry Maguire. The very first thing that Bruno did was he walked out of Ten Hag's office in search of Harry. And he told Harry Maguire, before even accepting the captain's armband, he sat down with Maguire face to face, looked him in the eye, and asked him a direct question. Are you planning on leaving the club this summer? Bruno wanted to ensure that he was not stopping or stepping on his teammates' toes. He wanted to validate Maguire's, standing in the squad. And he told Harry, you might have lost the armband, but you are still one of the core leaders that will never change. Maguire's response basically speaks volumes about the respect that Bruno commands within Carrington and within the dressing room. Maguire looked at him and said, basically, if there's anyone who deserves this armband, it is you. And I'm genuinely happy that it is you leading the team forward. I remember the backlash that, came out of it with Harry Maguire's sister posting on social media and all of that. Bruno's proactive, emphatic communication completely diffused the potentially toxic situation, preserving the squad unity and reinforcing the collaborative leadership structure that Manchester United so desperately needed. Now, it is very deep. It is deeper than this. And it's a fact that somebody that is a leader like this can talk like this, think like this, and plan like this. Yes, it is expected of leaders, but Bruno is just a unique situation. Because I remember that backlash. I remember how Ten Hag got hate and got stick for basically choosing Bruno over Maguire, and how people were lashing out at him that, Bruno is always flailing his arms and all of those things. Despite this extraordinary on-pitch output and his elite dressing room leadership, Bruno has remained the consistent target of criticism. Pundits have frequently targeted his vocal, expressive nature on the touchline and basically on the field, with none more vocal than former Manchester United captain Roy Keane. This is the meat of the matter. Now, we are going to talk about Roy Keane, but that will be in episode 3 of this, or part 3 of this explosion. And the truth is, the podcast is so juicy that I couldn't leave out any detail whatsoever. So basically, if you've watched the video up to this point, thank you for joining, and follow me as we get into part 2 and part 3 of this podcast, because we're basically breaking down every word that Bruno said. So let's get there. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you don't have to miss anything as relates to all things Manchester United. I'll see you in the next one. Take care, goodbye, and God bless.